got John McMullen Jody McDonald, and there is another follically challenged individual. He's another JAKIB buddy. We've got our buddy Marc Farzetta from the Farzy Show hopping aboard with us here on Birds 365. He always makes me jealous because he's got better color than either McMullen or I. That good Italian
That's something.
blood.
That's something.
Good Italian blood he's got rolling through him.
Yeah. White hair. White.
White
hair. It's coming. It's coming, boys.
Yeah, you got about 20 years to catch up on that one, Farty. I want to ask you the question I just asked Johnny Mac. Get your take on it.
All right.
Nick Sirianni has a different task coming into this season. His first year taking over the Eagles, he's inheriting a 4-11 team, 4-11-1. So his job was to just prove that he's an NFL head coach and win over the locker room that he can be the head coach of the team. His job going into the second year, different. They made the playoffs, good season, in that they're going from 4-11-1 to sneaking in the back door as a wild card team. Now, this is a different task altogether. You've got to get the group together that came up 8 seconds short of winning the Super Bowl. As John just pointed out, different guys, different personalities, different mindsets and the like. But you all got to get them all narrow focused at one task, getting back to the Super Bowl again, getting over whatever effect losing the Super Bowl had on him. How do we know Nick Sirianni's the right guy for that job?
Well, I mean, you got to look at the evidence that's in front of you right now, and the evidence is the maturation of Nick Sirianni, and so far he is built on, albeit brief, every year he has been here. And I think the biggest hurdle to get over is to prove whether or not you belong as an NFL head coach. And I think he did that with flying colors in his first year, including realizing that he might have too much on his own plate and handing over play calling to Shane Steichen, making sure that Jonathan Gannon had pretty much final say over the defensive matters and the strategy they were going to have there. And he trusted the coaches around him. I think he's going to trust the coaches around him again this year. He knows when he's got too much on his plate. He also knows that he has a developing quarterback, and he gives that quarterback enough room to develop, enough wiggle room to still play the style of football that he wants to play. And he'll be part of the game planning that allows that quarterback to play that type of style. The challenges, and the most convincing part of the evidence here, is the challenges that have been in front of Nick Sirianni. He's passed and done a phenomenal job of passing with flying colors. And one of the things I always go back to is Doug Peterson. The instant success he could have in Philadelphia was the fact that he was a player. He could get away with identifying with the locker room better than certainly a guy like Chip Kelly could. And the players really took to him and respected him for that. Nick Sirianni, having not been a player in the NFL, has gotten a very similar type of respect for the way that the veterans have respected him in the locker room, the way the veterans have listened to him in the locker room. And then right after him, the leadership he gets in this locker room help endorse anything, help sell anything he's trying to sell this team, especially some of the younger guys on this team. So I think when you look at the challenges in front of Nick Sirianni, he just keeps checking boxes. But you're right. Now the expectations change. It's not just, well, can he be an NFL head coach? Oh, he's an NFL head coach. Well, can he win in the playoffs? Well, he made it to a Super Bowl. And now he's got a group around him that he can continue to build around. And hopefully they check another box going into this season, which is obviously the ultimate prize of winning that Super Bowl.
Yeah, Mark, I think the biggest box, and I mentioned maybe the most underreported story to me in this offseason, is the change on the coaching staff. People are glossing over this like it's nothing. And what's amazing to me about it, Mark, we just went through this 6 years ago. And you remember the new normal, right? Hey, we're set up for years. This is rock solid. And all of a sudden, Frank Reich is gone, and John DeFilippo's gone, and at the time, nobody. All right, let's keep it going. Expectations didn't work out that way. Here you have losing both coordinators, and I know most fans don't care about one, which is fine. But as I mentioned to Jody, Nick was really close to those guys. Long-term relationships, thick as thieves. Brian Johnson, he had no relationship with before he came to Philadelphia. Sean Desai, no relationship before he hired him. You mentioned he's going to rely on his coaches. How do you develop that relationship with guys you just met versus a long-term relationship with guys you trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the exact word I was going to use there. You have to develop that trust with guys like Sean Desai. I think even though he hasn't been around Brian Johnson a long time, and I know you were referencing Jonathan Gannon as a guy that not a lot of fans care that the Eagles have moved on from, and he's got a job in Arizona now. But for me, I'm less worried about the Brian Johnson position because I feel like we do have a familiarity there. And more importantly, I think Jalen Hurts has more of a familiarity there. On the defensive side of things, schematically, as we've talked about all season long, and John, when you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Sean Desai being a more direct disciple of Vic Fangio than even Jonathan Gannon was. And I know that's become the hot name of everybody that wants to replicate some sort of defensive scheme. It's all about being like Vic Fangio. I think that's the way the Eagles want to play. But what I really took, what I really paid attention to was obviously Sean Desai's press conference when he talked about, and this could be just a line that they pre-wrote before the press conference in terms of, we want to model after our own city, of being gritty, of being palpable, right? And I thought, well, that's great for the posters, but I want to see what goes on when the in-game adjustments are needed. I liked what Sean Desai had to say. But more importantly, I like what James Bradbury had to say about Sean Desai, about how he's impressed with how smart the guy seems to be, how the terminology is going to change from Jonathan Gannon. This is to be expected from Gannon to Desai's scheme. And he talked about, and whenever you talk about one thing, it's like the other coach never did it. So I don't want to say that in the light of Jonathan Gannon, but I did find it interesting that James Bradbury pointed out the freedom you're going to have as a defensive player. You might have a little bit more freedom than what you had in the past to make a call on the field, make a judgment call on the field as a player. And I know players love that. And they feel like they can flourish in that. But as far as the trust factor goes with Nick Sirianni and his two new coordinators, I think it's going to come down to the players. And I think one thing Nick Sirianni has done a phenomenal job with is listening to his players. And the reason I'm not as concerned about the overall coaching changes when it comes to the assistants on this squad as it would have been in, say, 2018, going into the 2018 season, is I think so much relied on the mentality of Carson Wentz responding to changes on the offensive side of the field that I think you were on thin ice. We didn't know we were on thin ice at the time, but I think we've later found out just how thin that ice was, where John DeFilippo was the guy that was supposed to really put reins on Carson Wentz and really control Carson Wentz and really be able to be the tough coach in the room. And Frank Reich was supposed to be the quarterback whisperer in that regard, and he moved on. I don't think Jalen Hurts is not that same guy. Jalen Hurts, as I joke about all the time, but it's half kidding, he's on mental steroids with the way that he can, just how strong his mentality is. And I don't think he's a guy that a coaching change, an offensive coordinator change, a new quarterback coach, I don't think that's anything that's going to rattle him in any similar way that Carson Wentz was rattled in a similar situation.
Farzetta, I like yours and John's use of the word trust. Trust is going to be very important. And we know full well that Jalen Hurts trusts his new offensive coordinator. He's known him since he was, 5 years old?
Yeah.
His father will give him a tongue lashing if he doesn't do right by Coach Johnson. But here's the one thing I'm not sure I trust yet. Can Brian Johnson call plays like Shane Steichen called plays? Because Shane Steichen was really good. John's thrown the term a couple times already today, underrated story. That's the most underrated story for me, how good Shane Steichen was and how great a feel he had at calling plays. Why do we think Brian Johnson can be in the same neighborhood as Shane Steichen in that aspect?
I agree with you guys entirely. It's a great story. It's a great question that we haven't kicked around enough. When I have thought about it, my confidence in the idea that Brian Johnson will be successful as a play caller is that when you move on from a play caller that was as good as Shane Steichen, that just got a head coaching job, and you have a head coach that's from the offensive side of the field, obviously, he has an opportunity to take back play calling. If you're going to change, you have an opportunity to take it back. He chose to not take it back. He looked at Brian Johnson and fully knowing that he doesn't want to have to call plays. So he wants to be able to put in somebody that he can have confidence in. And I know Nick Sirianni, we all know Nick Sirianni has, he'll be making the game plan. And he said even last year when he made it official going into, I think it was training camp, saying that Shane Steichen was going to be the play caller. They'll be sitting down together game planning. But as far as play to play, Shane Steichen had that responsibility. If Nick Sirianni had the opportunity to take it back and felt like Brian Johnson couldn't do it, he had the opportunity right there to take back play calling. He decided not to do it because he has that confidence in Brian Johnson. That, for me, being that it was such a good decision by Nick Sirianni last year, and even in 2 years ago towards the end of the season when he handed it over to Shane Steichen, if he has that same type of confidence in this offensive coordinator, that's pretty much all the confidence I need at this point, having not seen it myself, that he'll be able to call plays similarly to Shane Steichen, and that Nick Sirianni will put him throughout the week in a position to have success come Sunday.
That's a good point, Mark, because I got to be honest. I was expecting not Nick to say, I'm going to call plays right away, but I was expecting it to go, well, we'll see. Go throughout the offseason, go throughout the summer. We're the bare reason you've heard Nick say in the past, I want to breed some uncertainty for opponents. Mm-hmm. I thought for just that reason he'd keep it under his hat, like he's going to play call. Well, we don't know. The Eagles CIA level stuff.
Oh, sure.
And he was like, nope, Brian's going to call plays. I think we were all shocked. It was right away. I agree with you. So that is a really positive aspect of that. But then, I start to get my contrarian nature on.
Oh, yeah.
I say, he can change that in week 1. You have a bad game, you can change that in week 2. I still think it comes down to it's really, really difficult in this league. And I go back to my original point. You win a Super Bowl in the case of 52, and you have all this attrition. Not only on the roster, but the staff. We've seen it in the personnel department. You do a Xerox copy, right? It's a little bit worse each time. A little bit worse as you go and you try to copy it. It's a little bit less clear. Am I being too wary of change, or is it just part of it? There's going to be change every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first off, Jody knows the old WIP timesheet. It would get a little bit more crooked every time it was printed over and over again when you had to fill that out. But that's what my mind goes to. But yeah, I feel like the thing that I go back to is it's not just Nick Sirianni and the fact that he can relate so well to these players and he's such a good leader. It's the fact that you have guys like Jason Kelce that just keep these guys in check, so that I know it when you try to repeat culture with a different group of players, but you still have that core, the guys that are kind of in orbit around that core, they might tend to stray. But one of the things that I think this team does so well is that the leaders, it's always great when your leaders are also your best players, because they're really doing a great job of keeping everybody within that same stratosphere. And I think what they do is they keep enough players just enough on edge to compete for jobs, compete for success, compete for those bonuses, those incentives and all that, where it's not just about the overall success that every fan is rooting for. It's also about the financial success, and they keep that in mind for everybody in that locker room. So for me, I think what keeps everybody together and keeps everybody in line and keeps that Xerox copy as little different as possible, as close to the original as possible, the way to put it, is the fact that you have such great leadership. And it's a really incredible thing and I watched some other press conferences from around the league. There is no team that gets the buzzword culture mentioned more than the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think it's because of Nick Sirianni. It's because of the veteran leadership here, the fact that they've won, and they have a young quarterback that is not only an MVP caliber quarterback, but also is just, like I said, mentally ridiculously focused on the task at hand. And if he is at that level and the leaders are at that level, then everybody else in the locker room has no choice but to fall in.
Real quick, sorry, Jody, just one follow-up. How important then is the start to the season, Mark? Because if they struggle against teams they're supposed to beat, because that's the soft part of the schedule,
right?
Offensively, how quick does it? Oh, this is Mike Rowe. This is
oh, geez, yeah.
How quick do they need to get off to a good start, especially offensively?
Well, first off, thanks NFL for 2 games in the first 4 days. That's Cool.
Yeah.
Stop. Don't whine.
But
Don't be a
They're
whiner.
a conference champion. That's ridiculous. When I saw that in the schedule, I thought, what the hell are they doing? But anyway.
Are the Vikings playing 2 games in 4 days, too?
The Vikings deserve the same respect the Philadelphia Eagles do, Jody.
well, they're going on the road. They're not.
They only won one last game.
Did they play in a Super Bowl? Did they play in a Super Bowl? Anyway.
No, they got picked off at home in a bad playoff loss. But they did win 13 games, and they got to go on the road week 2.
Talk
about disrespect.
That's what
How
you
about
get.
the Vikings 13 wins last year?
That's
Here's
what you
can
get.
do with your 13 wins, Minnesota. Get your ass on the road first Thursday of the year.
They're just going to choke again when it matters most anyway. Who cares? Anyway.
Shot on Minnesota.
Just pile it on Minnesota. It's important because...
By the way, true also. True. They are going to.
They are going to choke. You heard it here first. As far as starting out, I mean, we all know what city we're in. We all know our fan base. I will say this. I think it's really difficult to throw shade at the mental toughness of this team as a whole. And yes, there will be people that are thinking Rome is burning when they start out. If they start out slowly, if they start out and they're not playing well at all, and they don't look like they're in sync, and your linebacking core is more exposed than it's ever been, and that's saying something in this city. And your safety positions, you still have big question marks as to who your safeties really are and whether or not they're good enough to play that position, whether or not your cornerbacks are getting older. And I know they came off a phenomenal year, this entire secondary, phenomenal year. So there are questions that are out there. And I think those questions will only get highlighted. I think most of them are on the defensive side of the ball. But if this team is losing, I think it's going to be because the defense and their personnel might not be up to par. And with that, we'll become questioning Sean Desai and whether or not he's good enough to be a defensive coordinator. So I think a lot of it's going to be focused in that regard. But yeah, let's not act like in the first couple of weeks of the season, our hands won't be hovering over the panic button if this thing starts off, 1-4, 1-5, or God forbid, 0-3 even, where we'll be. But I don't think that's going to be the case. But in this hypothetical, if it does, we'll be the city will be ready to burn.
All right, then I'm going to flip you on your hypothetical.
All right.
Let's say that is what happens.
Yeah.
That most of us have the Eagles 5-0, if at worst 4-1 to start the season. Let's say they're 3-2 after opening up against a beatable lot of teams.
Okay.
We know what Nick Sirianni did in his first year. He said, maybe I need to back off a little bit. Shane, here's the play sheet. We're going to work it up all week. We're going to collaborative effort this thing. But in the actual game, I need to take a step back. I trust you. Here's the play sheet. I'm going to become a CEO coach like John McMullen suggests I should, and that's how I'm going to run my team. And you can attribute however much success to that as you want, but the season did seem to turn right at about that time. So I think there was a pretty good amount charged to it. Let's say get out 3-2. What's Sirianni's move? What does he do to change the course of the season, or does he just go, the hell, we're better than this. I had a couple of bad games. Hey, I'm not going to sweat this at all. Full steam ahead, no changes. Get out of my office. Don't bother me with those questions. We're the Philadelphia Eagles. We went to the Super Bowl last year. Shut up, we'll be fine. Which way does Sirianni go?
First off, I just want to hear him say, shut up, we'll be fine. I just feel like Nick would deliver that line beautifully. I don't think Nick is in the category of panic anymore. And I think it is a comforting thing and what better confidence can you have as a second-year head coach, as a third-year head coach than, hey, I just coached the Super Bowl. So I think that's a big confidence booster. And, hey, my theory works. I think the aesthetics will matter greatly. The optics will matter greatly. If this Eagles offense comes out stale with the weapons they have, with the backfield they have now, with the offensive line, and let's say Cam Jurgens is your right guard and everything's going swimmingly there. But if this offense comes out stale, I think you're going to at least be looking at 4 or 5 games there. So just out right around that 3-2 mark.
3-2. I got you 3-2.
3-2.
Yeah.
If you're looking right around that mark and you see the offense is stagnant, I think he might give it a couple more weeks before that kicks into high gear. But again, with this hypothetical, I don't see it happening. But if it does, and you see in case of emergency break glass type of moment, I would not be shocked if you saw Nick Sirianni in the early goings of the season take back play calling and say, all right, you know what? Because, look, you can have as much confidence, you can have much familiarity with Brian Johnson if you're Jalen Hurts. You can have much of that as you want. But until push comes to shove, until you actually get into the moment, you don't know how somebody's going to perform. So this might be a moment where Brian Johnson isn't a little – I don't think it's going to happen, but this might be a moment, having not done it, that this might be a moment for Brian Johnson where he's a little in over his head, and they decide to maybe start sharing that play calling responsibility a little bit more, and Nick starts to become more involved.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, while I brought this up, Mark, I think Brian's going to be fine. I think the Eagles offense is going to, as you kind of alluded to there, they're going to out-talent people. They're going to be just fine. I don't think he's going to mess with Brian because I don't think you want to mess with the quarterback, and they're very close. So I do think, and by the way, if there is a shared sort of environment, as you mentioned, we're not going to hear about it. They're not going to talk about it in public. It might be going on behind the scenes. Defensively, though, I'm with you, man. People are this back seven, and really, I'm talking about straight up the middle. The corners are still very good, although, is Bradbury going to have the same year? Avonte, when he was healthy, you hope Avonte can stay healthy for 17.
Yeah.
But in the games he did play, the 9-10 games he did play, is he going to play as well? Career years for both of them. But they're good. They're good players. Up the middle? Nakobe Dean better be a top 10 linebacker, like right away. Like right away. But perhaps that happens, but that is some projection, to put it mildly. And I admire everybody's optimism, but Sidney Brown ain't Brian Dawkins, just like Kayvon Wallace ain't Brian Dawkins. And that's nothing against Sidney Brown, but there are very few safeties in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So I'm not going to project him at that level just yet. That back seven scares the you-know-what out of me, Mark.
You guys, we've talked about him before, but I really like Reed Blankenship, but I'm not looking at him to be an anchor of this defense. I'm looking at him to be a good football player on this defense, but I no way think he's going to be some kind of like, bursting through the doors type of guy. Like, oh, look who's on the scene. It's Reed Blankenship's moment. The Sidney Brown thing, Nakobe Dean, Morrow, all these guys, I have huge question marks next to, because the defensive line has to be stout. There's some question marks there. You're losing Javon Hargrave, who played his role phenomenally well for the Eagles over the last couple of years here. But is that front is going to get enough push to make everybody else look good? Because I don't know if they're going to have that same type of push. And, man, they're going to have they need to have a much better push than what they had last year if you're going to be helping out this secondary. As you mentioned, they're going to be helping out this linebacking core. I mean, even by the Eagles standard, let's look at this for a second. TJ Edwards, undrafted, exceeded expectations. Before him, Alex Singleton, undrafted, exceeded expectations. Both those guys cashed in with 3-year deals around $18, $19 million in this past offseason. Good for them. But by this standard, this is a low standard, even for the Eagles, when it comes to what they're looking at from a linebacker position. And that's one of the things we always scream about. We hear from the fan base all the time about, oh, well, the Eagles don't believe in linebackers. They don't believe it's a valued position. Even for that, let's just roll the dice. Nakobe Dean, I ain't betting against him. I love the guy's attitude. I love his work ethic, his athleticism, and you can make all the comments in the world about the Georgia Bulldogs. One person in my comments calls them the Broad Street Bulldogs. And I think that this is something that they're, I hope, not reaching for. That, oh, these guys are all on the same page, them being together again. We'll see the best version you can of Nakobe Dean. We'll see the best version of Jordan Davis. Okay, you seem to be banking a lot on that, and I hope you're right, because for them just to look at the linebacker spot and be like, oh, yeah, this will be fine. No, I don't know about that one. I don't know. I'm rooting for a lot of these guys, but a lot of these guys I'm not betting on.
I don't know how you can expect Nakobe Dean to be a top 10 linebacker. He's so undersized that he fell to the 3rd round in the NFL draft. So how can you expect such an undersized linebacker to actually become a top 10 linebacker in the league?
Better.
Some cheese
John,
steaks.
how can you ask that? You continually tell me that's why he was a 3rd round pick, because he was so undersized.
Well, that's why he was.
You specifically state that. What do they list him in the team guide weight wise?
220-ish, somewhere around there.
I'll look it up right now, but I'm
Mark,
it's more than that. And you continue to tell me no friggin' way.
No, well, no friggin' way.
They lie straight to your face in the Eagles media guide as to how big he is. Well, how is this little peewee going to become a top 10 linebacker, John?
What? First of all, I have no idea why you're going down. But again, why do people want me to lie to them? He's not.
I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you.
He's not more than.
And I'm being unfair to you because I'm asking you to explain an overall thought process. But you oftentimes buy into it. That's why the league devalues linebackers, and he's an undersized linebacker, and that's why he should have been a 3rd round pick. I'm just saying he hadn't got any bigger. So how can you now expect him to be a top 10 linebacker? He's so undersized.
The reason he is a 3rd round pick, there's 3 reasons. 1, there were some injury concerns. 2, he's undersized. 3, he's not the best athlete from an NFL standard for the position. Guys who are drafted high at linebacker are the Devin Whites of the world, the Devin Bushes of the world. The world-class athletes, the guys who would just do every drill and they're just, all off the charts. But that doesn't mean you can't be a good player. The best linebacker in football is Fred Warner. He was a 3rd round pick, 70th overall, somewhere in that range. He was a 3rd round pick. I have tremendous optimism for Nakobe Dean. I like Marc. I mean, really smart kid, really instinctual as a player. My concern is, and Jody, I always bring up startup costs. I don't think it's going to happen right away. I think he had 34 snaps last year.
Right.
He's going to have some growing pains. If he does become Fred Warner right away, great. I'll say, man, that's amazing. But I'll say it's amazing because I expect all young players to have some hiccups. And, Fred Warner wasn't Fred Warner right away. And I think that's where everybody's jumping. Oh, Nakobe's like he's Hassan Reddick. Or he's Darius Slay. Those guys are proven. Demonstrated performance is what coaches always say. Those guys are proven. This guy's never played at the NFL. He played 34 snaps.
I'll try this one more time. Since there are startup costs, and I agree with you. I think that to ask him to just step in after 34 whole snaps, which, oh, by the way, thanks to the duo out there in Arizona, Gannon and Rallis, who got him on the field for all of 34 snaps. Thank you very much for that, guys. And undersized. How do you set the expectations of him being a top 10 linebacker? If he's got to grow into the job and it's going to take X amount of weeks because he only got 34 snaps last year and he was undersized and that's why he fell to the 3rd round, how can you realistically expect them to be top 10 linebacker just like that?
Well, you can't. That's my point.
You just said you need him to be the top 10 linebacker. You just said that.
Yeah, that's what I said. And my question to Marc, which I think he understood, is I think people are going overboard with the assumption that he's going to be a top 10 linebacker. Did you understand that, Marc?
I picked up, Johnny Mac. I picked up what you were putting down. Yeah, I got you there.
Same thing with Sidney Brown. Sidney Brown might turn into a great Pro Bowl safety down the road.
Yeah.
Right away. I think people are skipping steps. My point.
I think another way to illustrate it is if you let's just make it a broader statement. Like if you're talking about a bad football team and everyone knows they're a bad football team, all of a sudden you put Patrick Mahomes on that team. Like you need a quarterback, or you need a mediocre quarterback to play well above his threshold. That's at least the expectation for the year. In order for that, in this case, in this argument with Nakobe Dean, you need Nakobe Dean to be a Pro Bowl caliber linebacker to get close to the status you were last year as a defense. And I'm saying that's what you might need from him, but I'm not saying it's likely that it happens.
All right. Well, then,
I think that's
let me lock both of you in. Maybe I either didn't hear or understand your response, or maybe I put it wrong. So let me try and be more direct. First, Marc Farzetta, then John McMullen. Do you believe Nakobe Dean will be a top 10 linebacker at the end of his rookie year?
No.
John, no. You don't think either one of you think he's capable of doing that?
No.
Okay.
I like I said, I'm rooting for the guy. I'm not betting on him when it comes to that regard, but I think a more fair threshold is, can he even get to TJ Edwards level from last year? Like, give me that level.
By the way,
let's go beyond that.
TJ Edwards level was top 10 linebacker. TJ Edwards was a top 10 linebacker. So if you need to get to that level, you're setting the bar pretty high for a guy that 30 some odd snaps under his belt. John, right? And McMullen.
Well, PFF had him at number 6. So yeah, he was a very good player.
Do you want him to get to that level? That's top 10. That's top 6, buddy.
I don't think of TJ Edwards in that regard. If that's where PFF had him, good for him. And I'm not saying he's terrible. But
here's the thing. I think, and I can't speak for Marc, but I think people think, not everyone, but they like splash plays, right?
Sure.
You gotta have interceptions. You gotta have tackles for losses. If you're just doing your job, that's what PFF is about. Like, did you do your job on this particular play? Right. Then you get a positive mark, and that accumulates over 17 games, but you don't have that splashiness. And everybody wants that splashiness. I think Nakobe has a chance to be a far splashier player. And again, this is projection down the road. In 2-3 years, I think he's got a chance to be a really good player. But I think it's too much to ask. And by the way, they list him at 231, 5'11" to 231. Who'd we have Neil Stratton on? So many fans take these numbers as gospel. And, they were trying to say, oh, Kyler Murray's close to 6 foot. No, he's not. No, he's not even close. He's closer to 5'8".
He was talking about Young.
Bryce Young as well.
Not 6 foot. They don't even go there.
Yeah, they fudged those numbers. I hate to break it to you.
Yeah.
At times. He's very instinctual, very good, very high upside. I love his upside. I just think people are skipping steps. I really do. And I hope I'm wrong, by the way. I hope he turns into Fred Warner day one.
Hey, let me just say this. I think Nakobe Dean is going to be a very good linebacker in the NFL. Yeah. I don't think we're going to see exactly that this year. I think there's going to be a little bit of a process going on here. And I think as far as the splash plays go, you want somebody out there that's going to make a play. And the Eagles, especially in their Super Bowl run, when it came to forcing turnovers, they were talking from 6 years ago now. Last year, throughout the season, they did a great job of forcing those turnovers. You want somebody that's going to be able to force those turnovers and make those big plays that will change the outcome of a game and give more opportunities to your offense, and also nullify what might even be a good drive by the opposing offense that gets into the red zone. Next thing you know, you forced a fumble, you picked off a ball, you got a big sack, whatever it might be. Those are the splash plays that I want to see. And I think Nakobe Dean, thanks to his speed and his quickness, talk about the attributes that actually made him a third-round pick and give him this opportunity to be a starting linebacker for the Eagles this upcoming season. If he is able to focus on those attributes, and you see Jordan Davis and you see these guys on the defensive line and Fletcher Cox and whatever, you see them do their job and create opportunities for him, I think that speed and quickness will work wonders for this Eagles defense. That's the thing that I'm going to hang my hat on. If I'm going to have any confidence in Nakobe Dean being a good linebacker, it's going to be because he is able to use his quickness, his speed, and his instincts out there on the football field to be able to make a big play for the Eagles.
And while I appreciate PFF's rankings, and John did a good job of explaining it, that it's about doing your job on each individual play, you might not be within 10 feet of the ball. You might not even get close, but if you did what you were supposed to do, then it's credited as a good play. And a splash play you don't get bonus points for making a splash play, but the acknowledgement of most good to casual football fans, interception, a forced fumble. That's I don't care what he did the other 87 snaps.
Right.
He got his hands on a football when we needed the interception. There can be a balance there. It doesn't have to all be about just.
Well, who's a good example of
the splash plays.
The best example of the PFF conundrum is CJ Gardner-Johnson. Splash plays all over the place. Led the NFL in interceptions. Missed 5 games. 49th best safety in the NFL. 49th. Now, here's the deal, though. When it came to contract time, the Eagles were like, well, there's some issues here. I mean, we love the playmaking, but there's some stinking issues. This is not a superstar player. And they tried to get him at $8 million a year, and CJ got upset because he made splash plays. Players are like, I make splash plays. Well, yeah, but you're also effing up here, you're effing up there. And so there is a give and take there. It's
the old Asante Samuel line. If they're tired of my big play making ability, they're not going to see me here.
Fair point.
Asante did make some big plays while he was here, but you're right. Took his act out of town. Where are you taking your act this weekend, Farzetta?
Oh,
performing at the Chuckle Hut? Are you going down the shore? Where are you going to be this weekend?
Yeah, I'll be at Hill. No, it's funny you asked that. Well, tonight I'll be back on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel for a fine Phillies post-game show after Phillies and Cubs tonight. 7:05 start time. Ranger Suarez will be on the bump for the Phils there. And then this weekend, unfortunately, I got to take the rest of the weekend off. I got to go down for a family thing. My wife's family's from Baltimore. I got to make a trip down to Baltimore, and unfortunately,
Preakness?
I can't go to the Preakness.
You're going to Baltimore, and you're not going to the Preakness.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've done the Preakness 3 different times.
3 different times. Any crab cakes this weekend?
Oh,
you got to get the crab.
How do you not? I was in Baltimore last weekend for my mom's family's also from there, so I had some crab cakes down there. Jimmy's is my place.
Jimmy's,
Dundalk, baby.
We give him the free plug. Tremendous. Yes,
have you ever been in the horse you rode in on?
No.
I have not.
Best bar right in the
Inner Harbor
neighborhood in Baltimore. It's up from the Inner Harbor a little bit. It's a specific neighborhood. I can't
Federal Hill?
Might be Federal Hill. The horse you rode in on, name of the tavern, was in there 25, 30 years ago. As good a just cool, regular, in-town drinking bar as you're going to find. The horse you rode in on.
I may have been there and just don't remember, but I will definitely check that one out.
That was certainly before Farzy was married, when his wife started to dictate, we go to Baltimore, but we don't go to the Preakness. So,
oh no, I don't know. I think you've met my wife, Jody. She's the one that drags me to bars.
Okay,
that's how that relationship works.
Farzy, good stuff. Always a pleasure, buddy. Thanks for hopping in today.
Always, have a great weekend, guys. See ya.
The host of the Farzy Show, Marc Farzetta, here with us on Birds 365. All right, timeout coming. We are less than 20 minutes away from Eric at Home, writer for NFL.com, hopping on board with the Mac guys on Birds 365.